Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And welcome. So today we are backtracking a bit because I feel like we bypassed Halloween, which is one of our favorite holidays. I mean, the entire crew of Sminty, I think, really loves Halloween. I know Christina, I'm sure she would tell me otherwise, is a pretty big fan, as well as Joey. Don't know about Maya. We need to ask her about that. But we're all pretty big fans of Halloween, and I feel like we just kind of slipped by with doing very minimal, which is not like us. And, you might not know. I don't know, because people don't keep up with this. We do this accidentally a lot. We love doing horror movies and classics as a way of both escaping, and especially for this traumatic week, y'all, it's election time, and it's very traumatizing. Like, I think we've all lost sleep and are losing sleep. And again, extending this horror time for us, because I feel like we missed a lot. And if you haven't heard, again, this is where I was like, we sometimes do this accidentally. Oftentimes we do this accidentally. But this, we hit the anniversary of, for the Blair Witch Project. It is the 25th anniversary for this film. Everybody feels old, right? Anybody who's watched this, our millennial crew, you know what I'm saying. What's so funny, I just saw a TikTok video of someone asking, can someone who was there for the original premiere of Scream tell us what it's like? And everybody just, the comments are like, how dare you? Kind of like how you had mentioned you would love to have been born and been to the screening of first, I
asked now people about it too.
Yeah, and now people are asking about our experiences with that, and I'm like, that's rude.
Oh, I would love to talk about my experience.
I'm sure you would. You were young, though. How old were you?
I was quite young. I actually was forbidden from watching the Blair Witch Project, but my rebellion as a child was I would watch horror movies. So I did watch it. And my parents always caught me because my imagination goes wild and I was terrified. I was terrified. And they're like, what did you do? You watched the Blair Witch Project.
Right.
But yeah, I was pretty young for it. Mm-hmm.
So this came out in 1999. I'm pretty sure I watched it. I didn't go to the theater for it because theater was not a thing that we often would go to. Of my crew of people, we would go and hang out at parking lots. I don't know, and talk to people. It was weird. We were odd teenagers. This is what I've discovered. But we did watch it on DVD at friends' houses. And we definitely did this. I can't remember being scared. It was a phenomenon. So, with all that to say, I will say it was a phenomenon for this reason. The first being a found footage. So though it wasn't the first found footage horror movie, the first was actually kind of given to the 1980 movie Cannibal Holocaust, which is an Italian horror movie, which apparently they tried to sue the filmmakers of the Blair Witch Project, saying that they were copying them. And then they came back, were like, just kidding, go watch our movie. If you liked Blair Witch, you'll also like Cannibal Holocaust. So, have you seen that movie, Anney?
I have seen
I had a feeling.
I have watched. I can't wait to talk about this because I have plumbed the depths of found footage. I know it's not for everyone, but I have seen what there is to be seen. I have seen that, yeah.
Well, but then there's even another movie that's dated even further back, 1961. Called The Connection, which was an art house film by Shirley Clark, and they're saying that's the beginning of that format. Have you seen that one?
I have not seen that one. I don't think.
Assignment. There's also a 1980 mockumentary from England that's also being credited as being kind of like a found footage thing. But mockumentary is a different thing in its own, which we should talk about in itself because we love a good mockumentary in this house. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so even though it wasn't necessarily the first, this movie put found footage horror film on the map. They created a genre. And yeah, the technique is used quite often these days. We know this, all of the paranormal, which took me forever to figure out all of them were connected. Spoiler alert. Sorry.
Yeah. I don't think so.
Is that okay? Just for people, I don't know, just in case. But again, this was the film of like one of the first of its kind, and it made a huge mark within the industry. And from then on, we've had so many more and continue to do so, and it's made itself international. Like I watched, the Asylum of Gangnam, I believe is the way it was called, and that's the Korean horror movie that's really good and has some really big actors in there that I forgot about. But anyway, yes, the Blair Witch Project was written and directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. The two came up with the story of the Blair Witch several years before they started the actual project and filming, creating a 35-page screenplay, which also allowed for all of the actors to improv pretty much. And during this time, they made an ad in the back of the Backstage magazine for casting. And that's where they found Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael Williams, who were the three main characters. And damn, it made some money, though it exceeded the budget by 10. So the original intention was like $35,000 to $60,000 for its budget. And then after like post editing stuff, it went from $200,000 to $750,000 was the amount. But they made around $250 million worldwide. And it's still on top 100 lists as some of the best horror movies to date. 25 years later.
Yeah. And, if anyone in the industry will know, horror is often your genre you get into because you can make a lot of money when you're beginning. But found footage like Paranormal Activity costs like hardly anything to make, and it made a ton of money. However, as I'm sure we'll get into later, there's been a lot of controversy about the payment of the actors and who got the money because it was so successful.
Right. And I honestly don't know if I've ever seen any of them in anything else since then.
A lot of actors who do found footage, because like those are their names. You use your real name often in found footage. It's. I mean, like I said, it's how you get started in a lot of ways, in a lot of industries. There are some found footage movies that I've seen someone in, and they have gone on to be in something bigger, but generally, it kind of stays in that realm.
VHS. That is. Didn't people turn in as a contest their found footage stuff, and they just did different stories? Isn't that one? Is that one that I'm thinking of?
I'm not sure. That is an Atlanta-based, it was. I think it still is, Atlanta-based movie. It might be like that, but I think it is like they get different film people and are like, you go write a story, you go write a story, you go write a story. I don't know if it's a competition, but it could be.
Oh, for some reason I saw that as like they sent in things and they picked out certain ones and then they spliced them into one movie. So it was different tales in one. Because in like the whole premise is like they go into a house and they find all these different movies.
Yes.
Which is a brilliant project and really cheap to make. If you have someone else making and turning it in.
Again.
But anyway, yeah. So, of course, the Blair Witch Project in itself has become a franchise with several sequels. I've never seen any of them. I'm assuming you've seen all of them.
I haven't seen all of them. I've seen the second one. And I was disappointed with the second one. I'm sure most people were. No shade to anyone involved. But because it wasn't really a found footage, which is fine. But it just felt so different than, and then it was like the Book of Shadows was like a witchcraft thing, but it wasn't related to the witch necessarily.
Oh, really?
It was, and then there was like a daughter plot. There was a lot going on in it.
Okay, so I know nothing. Yeah. I just know this one. And I could see why your parents wouldn't let you watch it, especially for me, like as I was coming into my Christian era, really, really hardcore, like witches in itself is like, naughty. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. But yes, as we do, we're going to start with the plot. I'm just going to run through these and Anney interject at any point because I'm sure you're going to be like, no, but you missed this. You might tell me afterwards. So we have the three main characters who are off to seek the truth about the legend of the Blair Witch. College students Heather, Josh, and Mike traveled together to the woods of Burkittsville, Maryland, in search of the creature and the legends it left behind. In the town, they found out about the hermit Rustin Parr, which, by the way, when I was watching this again, I realized I'm like, these actors that they found to do the story. There's that one with the mother and the child, and the child's like freaking out. I'm like, how did they get the kid to do this? Because kids are not that good of an actor, especially for like found footage, you know, like types of movies. And that child really was like, stop talking.
The child could have just really been like, stop talking. Was not freaked out, just annoyed.
Just annoyed, and it just happened to like land perfectly. Because I was like, what? Anyway, so back to the hermit, Rustin Parr. And then he turned out that he murdered children in the forest. The story goes that they learn he would kill them in pairs in basements after like he kidnapped several of them, putting one child in the corner facing the walls while he's killing the other one. So that's the legend that we remember. Then they learn of other horrible murders, including the ritualistic murders of 5 men in the woods, and then about the student who went missing but came back, talking about seeing a woman whose feet didn't touch the ground. So many more horror stories. They collected all this data, went into the forest, of course. And as they travel in the woods with Heather in the lead, with only a map and a compass and, of course, their cameras and supplies, they start encountering strange occurrences, including finding stacked rocks or cairns in places like graveyards. And then they hear snapping of sticks in the middle of the night and other weird noises, all those things. So as they try to go back to their car, they realize they are lost and can't seem to make their way back. And as they try to return, they continue to come across odd and strange things, such as new cairns built around their tents, noises and sounds around their tents, missing items, and then even like pop-up of wooden dolls, I guess you would say they are, or at least figurines that are tied up in trees.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I think haunted most people after the fact, that whenever they saw these, they're like, it's a ghost.
Oh, yes. I could go into it, but I won't. But yeah,
personal experience is found. And then eventually they realize they can't find the map and start to panic about their situation and argue, of course. As they slowly start to come apart, they find out that Mike had found the map, kicked it and thrown it into the water, into the creek, I think, saying that it wasn't useful anyway. This was, of course, all of them arguing, and he's just sitting there being like, be cool, guys, be cool.
Mm-hmm.
But during another frightful night of weird noises, including hearing children's laughter, rustling and shaking of their tent, they run away, awaiting for the daylight to return. When they come back to the tent, they notice more disturbing things, including slime all over Josh's equipment, which kind of landed in like, is this a Ghostbusters moment? Because no one really talked about that as an issue, I feel like, beforehand. Did I miss that part?
I think it was... I don't think you missed it. I always assumed it meant like he was being marked for your next. Also, that part where they shake the tent, you could see children's hands.
Yes, yes.
It's very ghoulish.
And as you said, if he's marked, soon Josh disappears, and though Mark and Heather try to find him, they aren't successful. Heather finds a new bundle of twigs, and which have been, by the way, happening throughout the trip, just finding bundles. But with some of what we assume is Josh's shirt, which took me a while to figure out. I was like, okay. It's Josh's shirt, a tongue, teeth, blood, and other appendages, which you have to like pause to stare at because you're like, what's happening? Because it's just in a bloody mess. Which she screams and freaks out about, but doesn't tell Mike, which I'm like, see, have they not learned? Okay, whatever. So that night, Heather makes the infamous apology in the video to her and the others' parents about taking them into the woods. That has been parodied a lot. A lot.
My favorite is Mad TV. It's got a really good one.
That night, after hearing the screams of what they assume is Josh, they run to find him, or they end up at this abandoned house in the woods. They are like all over the place, and soon they go down to the basement thinking that's where they hear him. And then we note that we hear the screaming of Heather, and then she drops the camera and it points towards the corner where we see Mike. We are assuming Mike is standing facing the wall, and then the camera cuts off. So all of this is supposed to happen because in 1994, they went to do a documentary there. I forgot to state the year, but that's how it is. Very ominous. The end. One of the things that I was trying to do, because a lot of the movies like that, they have hidden things.
Mm-hmm.
like shadows or figures, and I just never saw anything. Did I miss something? Did you find those, or are those people talking about any of that?
One thing I find interesting, and this has never, ever, ever been confirmed before. I don't think it's true personally. But for a lot of people, including me, I remember seeing the feet at the end, like hovering.
You know what? Yes. Okay. I think I remember people talking about it, but I've never seen this.
I don't think it exists. I really don't. But I remember it, and it scared me so badly. And I think that's part of the power of like imagination
and suggestion.
Because there was a rumor for a long time that there was this like lost cut of the Blair Witch Project, and that you see the feet in it. And I honestly don't think it exists at all. But one of the reasons this was so successful is it was coming out in the time of the internet. It had an online campaign where you could go to the website and you could like click on images and try to find things, and it really marketed itself as a documentary, and people believed it was a documentary. And so people leaned into this idea of this lost cut where you actually could see the witch's feet. But I'm like so certain it doesn't exist, but I remember it.
So I know the ad campaign was something that was new as well, because they actually had missing posters for Heather, Mike, and Josh. And they had all these things like the site you were talking about, and how they try to make it so completely new and as if it was found footage. Like it, again, this really, really worked well for what they did. And not having to use CGI for anything, like clips of ghosts or that, is a feat in itself. Like the way they did this in such a purist form, and of course the equipment that they used, all of that was such a new way of doing horror movie, because the people were used to Halloween and Fear on Elm Street and all those things, that they were not expecting this.
No. And it was really scary. Like, I think now people who watch it are kind of like, oh, it's one of those things where technologically things have just changed, even though I think you could make a Blair Witch with our technology. But I remember watching this because I grew up like you in the woods in northern Georgia. And I watched it with my friends when we were like in her basement, and she had just windows all around her. And she got so scared. Like people were crying because it was so new. And you were like, what's in these woods?
Because noises happen. Like that's inevitable when you're in the woods. Like it's so easy to have that. And and also in each town, we have legends. We have stories. We have abandoned buildings that people talk about. We have like none of them most of them are not true. Like people that they don't exist. But we have those legends, and so it plays on your mind. That's what you know. You know people like to go in the middle of the night and do spooky things, like all of those things. We went in the middle of the night to an abandoned house trying to figure out if it was haunted. We were really dumb.
I did that too. But also, I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, I'm pretty sure this is partially inspired by the same witch that inspired The Conjuring, the first one. There is a real witch that is like legally in the record. It's obviously not completely her, but I think it was in part inspired by her. Yeah.
And with that, I thought we would do something a little bit different than what we usually do when we talk about films, because usually we could do themes and all these things, and I feel like we could do that. But instead, I thought we would go a different direction and talk about the significance of this film, as well as like the constant back and forth about whether this is feminist or not feminist. There's also a small conversation about being queer. I didn't jump into this. I will say that, because I was like, maybe not the topic for this time around. We'll come in, because we also have a lot of opinions. You have a lot of opinions about this movie, and I know you are ready. Again, like I said, articles have popped up on how this movie could be feminist for a few reasons, and also how it could be anti-feminist. I saw more of that than the feminist parts, and I think like it's interesting to have this conversation, because when it comes to horror movies, we don't talk a lot about it. We hadn't talked a lot about it until recently. More and more and more, be like, this is problematic. Why do people think this way? But for this film in itself, because it's, again, a different type of film to me. So let's just go ahead and hop into it. Some of the feminist views that I have both read and I've also felt myself, because you and I talked a little bit about this. A lot of the articles talked about the fact that this film is not necessarily filmed in a male gaze, which is not typical, especially during this time frame for horror movies.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this after you brought it up. I have seen a lot of found footage movies. And one of the difficulties with the found footage movie is you have to give a reason why. Why are they filming? Why do they keep filming? The Blair Witch is pretty clear and later devolves into like, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, ambitions of women. But that has been in a lot of the found footage that I've seen is the break is when women are the ones who are like largely controlling the found footage, leading the project, it feels much less sexualized than when men, the characters or whoever are running the camera, then it feels much more sexualized. It's almost always more of a professional, this is a thing I'm working on, this is a job that I have or whatever that I care about, as opposed to when men are the ones behind the camera. It does feel much more sexualized. But yes, in general, horror movies do have a very long history of sexualizing women and being filmed from the male gaze. And this really was not that at all.
Right. Which is surprising because it was directed and written by men. And as much of the horror genre depicts women as sexualized victims, you know, having sex gets you killed, we know this, or virgin heroes, the only people who can really save those are those who are pure and chaste, or the Virgin Mary figure type of conversation. The Blair Witch Project, for its characters, really never uses this as a plot device. Now we're going to talk about the villains in a bit, but like for its character in itself, they don't. And also there's no real sexual abuse or sexual scenes that are needed to push the narrative forward, which I really found that interesting because, you know, usually all of them have some type of story of why some women are really just angry.
Yes. Or like the woman is dating, they're dating, and that's part of the story. But in this instance, that was not the case.
Right. I think that was one of the things you and I talked about before when we were talking about doing this movie. It's like even more rare. They kept the relationship of the three main characters platonic. There was no indication at any point in time that they were any attractions or jealousy. Like jealousy and like power, like wanted to take over or control or blame the others for the situation, sure, but not sexual or relationship powers, like more dynamic. So I thought that was really a different take, especially again during this time where we see this as a constant, like, don't believe my wife, I don't, you know, type of moments.
Yeah, and you know, also they're, you know, sharing tents and scared and all that stuff, and it never even feels like they're thinking about going that way, which I wonder, as you know, found footage, how it works. As you said, there's this like bare outline of a script, and it's like get to these points today. I wonder how much of that the actors were kind of just like, I'm not feeling it, so
we're just going on with it. We don't know each other like that. Let's move on. Which again, you would think could be an easy plot point, but with all of that, there are many who have felt like stereotypes, especially when it comes to the women villains, being like deranged or vengeful, one-dimensional characters, that still existed in this movie. Of course, this could be the conversation that it was a really short film.
It was a short film.
It was a really short film with, I think they filmed 85 hours and cut it down to like, what, an hour and a half?
Like 90, yeah.
So like it was like a lot of stuff that they did, and then cutting it, editing it down. They're like, okay, we just want the actions and the creepy moments, not the backstory, which would be like, that could have been what they were trying to do with the sequels. It just didn't do well. Is that what they were trying to do with the sequels?
Maybe. I've heard there's a new one coming out, and
I think I have heard that too.
Yeah. That's why the actors, I mean, for many reasons, they should get paid, but they're like, hey, remember us.
Right. I mean, they could go back and make an extended cut today, like pretend like it was there with this, because they don't need more technology, honestly.
I know.
If they wanted to make a movie, just take the original and pretend like there's an extended cut that's missing.
clearly a bunch of us think it already exists.
Exactly. Anyway, so here's for a little bit from the McGillDaily.com. They were writing about this, and they say, praise for the Blair Witch Project, however, does not discount the trope of portraying women as the deranged antagonist in horror, which needs to be addressed in order to continue enjoying the genre. The Blair Witch could be observed as being a villain without motive. No background is given to the reason behind her evil, nor is Ellie Kedward's character developed beyond witchcraft, which is the witch, which I don't remember her name being mentioned, but I think I just bypassed that. They do mention her, though, right? She's the one that's the floating one?
I think so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it goes on. This could be attributed to shallow characterization, wherein she lacks a complex and multifaceted personality. Moreover, it perpetuates the association of women to witchcraft, wherein they were believed to be, quote, more prone to diabolical possession and essentially imperfect following the Black Death. So this was a whole article in which they were talking about witches in general and how they are seen as devil-worshipping child killers with no reason behind other than power and greed and a lust for the devil. Which, yeah, I honestly, because of the way it ended, it seemed less about the witch and more about the ghost of Rustin Parr. Like that's because there's so many stories that they attributed, like so many things. Of course, I don't know. Was it implied that Rustin Parr was possessed by the witch to kill these children?
I think that's one interpretation. I always interpreted it as there's just something, there's been a lot of bad things that happened in these woods, and people were blaming the witch.
Okay.
And she may or may not have had something to do with it, but people were, I think, blaming the witch.
The witch. Okay. Because I was like, the way the two died seemingly seems like a...
Right. Yeah.
The Rustin Parr story, the more so than the witch story. But all of that to say is, yeah, that is one of the things like they continued with. But again, I would sit to argue, and you know us, we love talking about how infamously bad the takes on women villains are in horror movies, or why it seems like obviously is a sexist reason for it. But like the fact that it, again, was a 90-minute movie and they just wanted to base it on them and their experience without bringing in a secondary story, too much of a secondary story. Like literally the first 15 minutes was in the town.
Yeah.
And the rest was them in the woods. So I think that had more to do with how they wanted to tell the story more so than characterizing the villain. I don't know. That's just an opinion, though.
I think so. I think there's certainly this argument to be made. But I would also say we could add more to it in that it was a legend. Like you said, a lot of these small towns, ours included, have those legends. And we don't hear beyond that.
Right.
And that is all you know. And they were going into the woods. That was their whole point of this documentary, was they were going to find out, like, is there something there? And I even saw a lot of recent articles about, like, the Blair Witch was a bellwether on technology and the dangers of technology. But them being so, and especially Heather, but them being so confident and not respecting even the woods necessarily, that I feel like when you see them deteriorate while they're lost, that's to me the true horror of it.
Right.
And we do know through so many horror movies the like negativity that makes everything worse if there is a witch or whatever. But to me, she feels like almost they heard this legend and made it real, if that makes sense, to themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And going with that, so there's also the idea that the main character, who was a woman being in charge, although that was a great step up. You're like, yeah, she's being assertive and taking charge and blah, blah, blah. Her mishandling of the situation ended up being their demise. So it was a woman's fault because she was not willing to let go of her ambitions. Like, she would not stop filming. They were really irritated by that. But all the other things. So here's a bit from a paper written by Danica MacDonald. Believe they wrote this for a school in Ireland. They had a lot of thoughts about this type of conversation for women. It was called for like Americana, which was interesting. But McDonald wrote, both the witch and the protagonist in the Blair Witch Project overstep their boundaries in a world that does not accept such trespasses. The witch, by the very fact that she has to dare to be a witch, and in so doing, reject norms of society, and the protagonist because she investigates this transgression. Do not go downstairs. Do not go into the woods. Do not talk to strangers. And do not open the door when you are alone are reoccurring warnings in the horror genre. Yet these warnings also bleed into real psychological and sociological lessons. Do not trespass, cross gender boundaries, or stray from social norms. Curbing curiosity has become a horror film tradition. We learn, adopt, and agree that curiosity is a dangerous notion. It is a quality that needs to be controlled, for the alternative lack of control is dangerous and undesirable. So she's going all over this, like, no, this is why. She is the downfall, and so is the witch. But they continue. In the Blair Witch Project, it is Heather Donahue's curiosity to learn which leads her to the woods outside of Burkittsville. Notably, when all of these women endeavor to see, they are punished for their trespasses into temptation. Once you have seen, you must die a gruesome death, or so is the underlying message of the contemporary horror film. The forbidden, once seen, cannot be unseen. Seeing, learning, and knowledge are a masculine prerogative. They belong to the realm of public space which men occupy and are free to move within. Women who violate this rule are dangerous and threatening.
We're still talking about this today, about ambitious women and how we punish them. And certainly she did have this passion. She really wanted to get this project done. But I find that so often where if it was reversed and it was a man doing it, we'd be like, he was just trying to get the truth. But with her, we're like, she should have known better. She didn't know anything. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of instances in the movie where she was trying to get them out, and clearly the woods is not going to help them out.
Right.
But she's like she is making these logical decisions. Yes, it was her project. Yes, she did not want to leave, and they really wanted to. I'm not saying she doesn't have some share of the blame, but it is that punishing of, oh, she's this ambitious woman, and look what it got her.
I mean, and the same like curious woman who stepped out of her role, so therefore she deserved to die, and anyone who supports her deserves to die with her. Yeah. It's that conversation, and it's an interesting conversation. I will hold to the fact, however, that Mike was really the problem. Why would you throw away the map and then also try to gaslight them into thinking that that was one of them? Like, instead of stepping up immediately, he waited for a couple of days for them to like come to a point of almost like ending everything. They were like, no, like yelling at each other, and he's like, all right, fine, I did it. And then saying
he laughed,
it didn't matter anyway, we couldn't use this anyway, it wasn't helping us anyway, blaming her, saying that she had the wrong thing, essentially. Same thing with the compass. There's a back and forth about the compass, and they're like, are you reading this right? Are you doing this right? The entire time.
Yes. And it's made clear, whether you want to believe it or not, I choose to believe it. It's made clear she actually is a knowledgeable hiker. She says she goes hiking. That was her hobby.
Weekend.
I believe that she knew. I think the woods were messing with them.
Yeah.
But they just kept pushing back and doubting her. And to an extent, it's fair if the woods are, to an extent it is. But especially Mike. And I think it's also interesting going back to the technology bit, because he was a new member. They'd never worked with him before.
They just met him.
Yeah, Josh and Heather had worked together before. And I think that kind of, like, when you get a crew together and you don't know about that, like, new member and how they're going to turn out, I think that was one of the pieces of what just broke apart the whole thing. But I agree. I think it was Mike. I blame him.
Mike's fault. But also the weak one of this bunch, I would say, is Josh, which is why he was targeted first. Because he was crashing out pretty hard at the very beginning, freaking out, like doubling over into a fetal position. Like he was also the one that said that the first night she was saying she sleeps like a rock and doesn't hear anything, and he heard everything, and he was freaking out that first night.
Yeah, that's true. He was an interesting mix of the calming presence, but the one that was really panicking, if that makes sense.
He lost it completely.
He lost it completely. So got in his head for sure.
Yeah, for sure. This is a pretty old movie, 25 years old. It can rent a car. But people are still talking about it. I will say the McDonald paper or research paper I think it was from 2010. So it's still 10 years older, 11 years older than the movie, I believe. But fascinating in itself because they wanted to look at this aspect of like, okay, this is a film about how women shouldn't be leading. In itself, in this bigger conversation. And I could see that. But again, also, like, I really love that we didn't have to see nudity. We didn't have to see her breasts. We didn't have to have a moment of, like, her being very sexualized or any of those things. Like, she just was. There was no question about boyfriend, husband, any of that. She just moved on. Interestingly, though, Heather Donahue, did comment about these arguments saying this. I've heard people say that the Blair Witch Project is a feminist movie because there's a woman in charge, and I've heard it called a completely anti-feminist movie because this woman screws everything up. Who cares, really? It's just a movie. Which I'm sure like a lot of people would like it to be just a movie, but we can't have anything nice here. We know this.
We can't.
I don't think this is one of those that actually stands for, like, it doesn't. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being too broad in this. Like, I don't feel like this movie was necessarily a stance on like equality or gender differences as much as they wanted to tell you a scary story and make money.
I think so too. I don't think there was any. No, there might have been, but I don't feel like it was trying to say anything particular about women being in charge. Perhaps the issue is that when we see it, it's rare, and that's what we think.
And and it may also absolutely have to do with also people who came back and saying, this is why women shouldn't be in charge, when the movie in itself is like, no, the forces of evil were against them. They were never going to leave. It didn't matter who was leading. Yeah,
because again, I think if the man had been playing Heather's character, we wouldn't necessarily be. Maybe we'd be talking about like, oh, his genius. But instead we're talking about, oh, she didn't know what she was doing. You know what I mean?
Right. So it's not necessarily the movie makers as much as the creators or writers as much as what society wants to dictate on it. Because again, even if it was dudes, because we have seen many found footage where it was men. The Grave Encounters, we have the male lead coming in, and he's the one. But it kind of is similar to where they blame him because they can't get reception, in that same realm. But we don't see it as much as a conversation about how men can't lead. But he's the one, he does end up in that situation.
And I would argue what he did was worse.
If I remember correctly.
I would argue, like, I suppose you could get into the nature of who believes what, but bringing in like a fake medium and all of this stuff in a place that could potentially be dangerous.
Right.
And that's another thing about the Blair Witch, I suppose, is in the beginning when they are interviewing all of those people, they do interview that one woman who you can tell is like the talk of the town.
Right.
Who has all of this knowledge about the witch and is kind of weird. And they dismiss her. But I do feel at the heart of it, there was a genuine curiosity, whereas Grave Encounters, it was much more like craven.
Money making.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, we've seen that in in actual ghost hunting shows, reality shows where they do this, and everybody's like, this is fake, this is not, all these things. And I used to love those. I loved those ghost hunter shows. A little too much, weirdly. But because I wanted to believe and I wanted to see these things. And I also love that aspect of being scared if they're real. I went on a couple of ghost tours. One in Roswell. It was interesting.
Ooh, y'all. Did you see anything?
So we had a moment where the flashlights and everything went out.
Ooh.
Yeah, it was freaky. We're like, but anyway, but all this to say, this movie definitely opened a door for new ways of creating movies at that time. Unfortunately, we kind of already referenced this, and Anney, you can get into it a little more. I think you know a little more about this. Movies like reality TV, much like reality TV, it leaves very little for the actors. In this movie, it seems to leave them behind, as in like monetarily. They sign a contract, not realizing how big this movie is, because again, independent movies like this, you don't know, they're found footage, so not a lot goes into it, like all of the CGI or any of that. It's not supposed to anyway, but I'm sure there's some. Yeah. But like, the intention is bringing in unknown actors. All the Paranormal Activity, the first ones are like unknown actors who just come in, do this found footage types of movies, and then never get paid. They don't never get really royalties. They're not really under contract like that. They do kind of, again, reality TV is very similar to this, where the production or the studio owns all the rights and nothing is given to the actors.
Yes, and I think especially because this happened in the early days,
right?
They really didn't get anything, and you can find a lot of interviews they've done recently, the actors from this, about it. I have worked on a found footage movie. I hope it never comes out.
If anybody finds it, tell me.
It's really fun. I had a great time, but I mean, essentially, you're like running the sound and the camera. You're in the woods or wherever. You're coming up, you're improvising a lot of it. You just have to hit certain beats.
Yeah.
And, there are found footage now that it's a popular genre. This is not always the case, but it is a cheap way to enter the industry. So a lot of people who are starting out do it. And a lot of actors who are starting out will sign on to it because, and I've said this before, wildly enough, a lot of times you don't get paid for this at all. What you're hoping for is to get just credit, just like a shot you can show to other people, like I can act. And so it is bizarre to me that you would give people like the bare bones of a script and equipment and have them do it all, and then they get paid nothing. And it could be incredibly financially lucrative.
Right.
And they get nothing.
Right.
There's no guarantees, but wow.
Yeah. And like, just as a reminder in general, actors don't get paid much unless you're a big name movie star. And seemingly those are the people are all children of famous people already that get those kind of breaks. You rarely make money.
No, you really don't. I think people are often shocked by that. I'm like, yeah, no. It's not much at all. It's usually the vibe of like, you are so lucky to be in this.
Right.
Maybe you'll get seen by someone else and you can take that next step. And then maybe you'll make enough to not do whatever other jobs you're doing to do this.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the scheduling, you have to be so open.
Yes.
Such an odd thing. Like when the film industry came into Atlanta, and then having all these friends who moved here or like who have started up really, trying to get their career, like the amount of odd jobs they have to take and do because to truly be an actor, they have to be able to go on a whim for as long as they want you there. And you may not get on stage at all that day, but you have to be on call just in case. That's absurd to me. And you get paid minimally for being there.
Yeah. And then you have to, I still think this should be illegal, but in a lot of cases you have to pay to audition.
Yeah, that's odd.
You have to pay to audition, and you have to do it a lot of times within 24 hours.
Really?
Like you get the script and you have to do it, and you might have to pay for it. And if you need somebody to read with you, then good luck.
There's so many scammy like talent agencies.
Yes.
That I say, ugh. Ugh.
Yes, it's a big problem.
Anyway, all this to say, Heather, Josh, and Mike deserved more for the role that they played, because I honestly haven't seen them in anything else. And we know their names. I will say that. We know who they are, but I don't think that's really helped them in the career of like movie industry.
No, but
entertainment industry.
They did a great job.
Yes, they did. For something that is this new, this groundbreaking, they did an amazing job. All that to say is let us know what your opinion is, because I think like it's interesting when you see movies like this and the like trying to get deeper meanings and trying to get like the understanding beyond just this was a new technique. This is a new way of storytelling. It gets into a bigger conversation that people were like, I see it this way and I see it that way. And I love that.
I love it too. And I would love to come back and just talk about found footage in general. Yeah. Because I think there are some movies where the public perception has shifted. Paranormal Activity is one of my favorites, where everyone went from like, Mika's so funny to being like, no, he's a jackass, like over time. So I think we should come back and look at that. But in the meantime, yes, if you have any thoughts about this, any favorite found footage movies, please let us know. You can email us at stuffandmomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter @momstuffpodcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We're also on TeePublic, YouTube. I've been forgetting about YouTube. We also have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production by iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your favorite shows.